And today we are 4 weeks into that series, and we are looking at the topic of the fool tonight. If you were here with us last week or you listened online, this is kind of the second half of the coin that we turned over last week when we looked at wisdom. Because you see these two rails that run through Proverbs, one destination to which the book is calling us, and that is toward wisdom, and one danger that we are to avoid, and that is foolishness, or being a fool. So if you want a picture for us tonight to kind of get us off in the right direction, it would be this picture of a do not enter sign. That if wisdom is the destination, being a fool is a don't go there, don't enter, don't pass, go and collect $200 and become a fool. It's avoid this at all costs. And so that's kind of where we're going tonight. But as we go there, I want to give us a couple of cautions. The first one being this, that you need to hear this message for you and not for somebody else. We were talking about that and kind of laughing about it this morning, that you're going to hear these things, and if you've been walking with God for a while, you're going to probably in some ways going to begin to say, oh, that's not me, and that's not me, and that's not me. You're going to want to elbow your spouse, or you're going to think of your roommate and say, boy, they need to hear this. I'm going to make them download it. And if you get too into that, well, you can miss what God is trying to say to you tonight. So let me just say, and invoke the privilege, this is an elbow-free zone tonight, to resist the temptation. The second thing is, we also need to resist the temptation to feel self-righteous about where we might be on our journey with wisdom. Because some of us can look at this and say, oh, you know what? That was so like 7th grade. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old. I've been out of that for a long time. Well, let me just let you in on a little secret. The fingerprints of foolishness are all over your life. And I think as we look through what we see in the text tonight, you're going to begin to see it. And so we need to take this as a humbling thing. To say, you know what, I haven't arrived. I don't have it all together. And God has been so gracious to point these areas of foolishness out of my life. And I want to acknowledge it, and I want to turn from it, and I want to grow through it. Now here is the final caution I would give you as well. As we go down that road, I don't want you to be overwhelmed or defeated by what you hear. So I was thinking about that this week, and I was looking at my own life and looking at some of the crazy mistakes I've made, some of which I'll share with you, most of which I won't. Thinking about this concept of being a fool can really be something that the enemy can use to drive us to despair. And I want to guard us from that. Because when we understand the second bookend of information that I want to share with you tonight, that all of these proverbs need to be necessarily connected to both Jesus and the gospel and its function in our lives, we will see that this is not an opportunity for despair, but one of great dependence upon Christ. Because what do we talk about in week 1 here when we talk about wisdom? We talk about the ultimate embodiment of wisdom being who? Being Jesus. You see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, that Jesus Christ is the wisdom of God. And so when we understand these proverbs, and tonight we see kind of the underbelly of what it looks like to not walk in wisdom, it should make the beauty and the glory of Jesus shine so much more brightly. Because as the perfect embodiment of wisdom, He died for all of the foolishness we've ever been a part of. And He lived to give us both the pattern and the power to walk away from being a fool and walk in wisdom. So when we hear what we hear tonight, we're going to define foolishness, we're going to see it in action, we're going to see the consequences of it. We always need to be connecting all those things, especially the application we're going to make, to the need that we have for Christ in an ongoing way. And to start us off in the right direction, I want to share one more picture with you. Some of you guys will recognize this handsome man from the 1980s. It's Mr. T, who had this to say, I pity the fool that don't listen to Dustin in the Proverbs tonight. Because you need to pay attention to what he's got to say. Well, you can't talk about being a fool without talking about Mr. T. And I think he would also have us understand this as well. A definition of what a fool is when it comes to looking at the book of Proverbs. You'll see in your notes there. I believe a fool is someone who is out of touch with the way God intended the world to work. Let's say that together. Someone who is out of touch with the way God intended the world to work. And if you've been around the Scriptures, you're probably familiar with what I call the big story of the Bible, that of redemptive history. That when God created the world, He spoke it into existence by nothing. He was able to be so powerful that He created the world just by His Word. And things went well there for an undisclosed period of time. And then there was an exchange in the garden with Adam and Eve, our original parents, over a piece of fruit, and they broke the world. And you and I have been dealing with the consequences of that brokenness ever since. But when Jesus came on the scene, and He lived the perfect life that you and I can't live, and He died a substitute's death on the cross, in our place, he offered to us an ushering back to that reality. Now, it's not here in its fullness, but he ushered us into a way that life will work, that we can live with wisdom. We can begin to put in place some of those principles that would have existed when the world was still perfect. And even though we won't see full perfection in this life, we can experience some of that reality of what life looks like when it works. But see, a fool doesn't embrace that. They still try to make it work with their wisdom. They try to make it work with the wisdom of the world. They try to make it work in a way that is ultimately broken. See, that's what a fool does. Their brokenness touches everything. And you see this time and time again throughout all of the text that we'll see here today. And let me just warn you, as I did last week, we're going to cut through these pretty quickly. But as we get into them, I want to make you aware of the three different kinds of fools that exist within the book of Proverbs. There's actually more than this, but if you really kind of distill it down, there's three major kinds of fools. The first one is called the simple fool. And these are people that are kind of gullible. They can be taken advantage of. They can be quite naive. These are the people that believe that the Chinese gymnasts are actually old enough to compete. These are the people who, if they go into the country and they pay $12 for a pair of Oakleys, that they actually got a real good deal on expensive sunglasses. But you know, if you buy those, they break in like 2 days because they're not real Oakleys. Those are simple people. They believe everything. They don't have the appropriate filter to help them discern reality. The second kind of fool is a fool that's called a mocker. These are people who are convinced in their own mind. These are people who had looked into the whole Bigfoot craze and scenario a couple weeks ago, and they're still waiting on the DNA test because they're convinced that he's real and it's a government cover-up. That's a mocker. That's somebody that's convinced in their own mind they got no place for you, for God's wisdom, and they're going to stay their course. Then there's also the vindictive fool. These are the people that are stubborn. They take revenge. These are the people that if you offend them at a party, you go back to your dorm if you're in college, you wake up the next morning and you have a Sharpie mustache and you're a girl. These are people that really don't like it when other people one-up them. They're mean. A lot of CEOs are this way. A lot of even pastors can be this way. But a vindictive fool is somebody that wants to take revenge. And they're out to get somebody if somebody's out to get them. So if you look at all these things, you typically see the word translated just as fool. And so what you're going to see in the big list that we have here tonight is shades of all of these kind of taken together. But if you really did some crazy Hebrew work, which I won't drag you into tonight, you can see these distinctions even more clearly. But let's begin right here with this combination of what the fool does. We'll start in chapter 1, verse 7 and verse 22. A fool despises wisdom and instruction and hates knowledge. And you see why in chapter 28, 26. Because they trust in their own mind. Found this quote this week from a guy named Malcolm Forbes who said this: "The dumbest people I know are those who know it all." And see, these are people that have determined that Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 that we talked about last week, to trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, and all your ways acknowledge Him and He will make straight your paths. Well, that's just really not for them. Because why would they want to trust in God and His wisdom when they're perfectly fine with the wisdom on their own? See, that, in essence, is what it means to be a fool. They've got no regard for God because they're convinced in their own mind. That's why you see what you see in 18:2 and 15:7. They take no pleasure in understanding. Instead, they air their own opinions. And when they do, you'll see that their lips do not spread wisdom. I'll give you several pictures tonight, starting with this one. This is the person that I think of when I think of this. It's Dwight Schrute from The Office. He doesn't really know about The Office. He doesn't really know exactly how the office or the world, for that matter, works. But he's got no problem spouting and sharing all of his unintelligence with anyone who will listen. That's what a fool does. They don't want to hear wisdom, but they got no problem airing their own opinion. 10:18 says, "The fool utters slander." This is kind of like the game we played growing up, kind of like the grapevine game. These are the people, when you get around and you share something, well, you know you can't. Because it's going to come back to everybody else in the office, everybody else in your sphere, and by the time it comes back, it's not even going to be true to what it started as. These are gossipers and liars. Great picture here, you see this. Their mouths pour out and feed on folly from 15:2 and 14. Here's the picture for this. It's Audrey from The Little Shop of Horrors. It's a plant with a big mouth that says, "Feed me, Seymour, feed me more and more folly." Fools can't get enough. Their wisdom, or their lack of wisdom builds upon itself, and they can't have that satisfied. Here's another one. Their hearts proclaim folly, and they flaunt it, from 12:23 and 13:16. Taking a trip through pop culture tonight. This time, Rex Kwon Do from Napoleon Dynamite can be used to us. My favorite scene in this movie, one of which is when he says, when he pulls out his pants, that, "How would you like to have a roundhouse kick to the face when I'm wearing these bad boys?" Well, this is a good example of a fool that proclaims his folly and flaunts it to others. There's another one from 29:11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit. These are the people in your life that are more cartoonish, like Yosemite Sam. These are people that when something happens, they're just waiting for that pin to drop so that they can be rooting, tooting, angry, and just destroy everybody in their path. A fool is somebody that can't bridle their tongue. They can't use any of the self-control that God has given them to be able to say, hey, you know what, maybe I shouldn't react. Instead, I should think and prepare and then respond. A fool just flies off when they get mad. Which is why you see in chapter 20, verse 3, that it leads to quarreling. That's why you see in chapter 18, verse 6, that their lips walk into a fight and their mouth invites a beating. Now, I wish the story that I'm about to tell you was not true, but I've actually been almost on the wrong end of this myself. And some of you have. Because our mouths have gotten us either in physical or emotional or financial trouble. I remember back when I was in college, I went to see this band. I was on this date with a girl, by the way. This was our first and only date, which set this up for this being a previous story. And so we go to this neighboring city, to a place I never go and probably will never go again, to see this band, which if I called their name you wouldn't know, so don't try to figure out who it was. And we have this total hole-in-the-wall dive. I remember walking up and telling the guy, hey, we're here to see this band. And the music was so loud at the front door that he couldn't even hear me. So I'm kind of like standing under a top, like, we're here to see this band! And he just kind of points and grunts upstairs, and we kind of move inside up this dark staircase. We get up there, and I didn't really know this, but this band was apparently much louder live than they were on the records. So I'm walking in like my nice jeans, my little t-shirt, to basically this like mosh pit that's already getting ready to form. Now, I'm not really like a mosh pit kind of guy. And I didn't know this girl was either, but hey, I guess we are. So here we go, and I kind of move over, and I'm like moving in. I'm like, what's happening? How you guys doing? So we're standing there, and the band's getting louder and louder and louder. And so everybody's bouncing up and down. I'm like, well, I guess I'll do what everybody else is doing. So I'm like bouncing up and down too. And this guy standing next to me, he's got his drink or whatever. He like bounces over into me a couple times. It was a little bit annoying because I'm like, this is a nice t-shirt. I don't want to get dirty. What's wrong with you? Well, the night was on. About 5 to 8 songs into it, he bounces into me and her and like sloshes whatever he's got going like on us. And typically, I'm a real nice, laid back, doesn't really shoot my mouth off kind of guy. But I don't know if my sugar was low or what the deal was. But dude, I just let this guy have it. And I can't remember, I think my brain has actually blocked out exactly what happened. If I like physically grabbed him and got in his face, or if I just yelled at him. But it was something to the extent of, listen, buddy! Remember, I'm in a nice t-shirt, nice jeans here, in the mosh pit, bouncing up and down. And I'm saying, listen, if you hit me again, you and I are going to have big problems. And as soon as I said it, I'm like, because I'm thinking, I don't really know where I am. I don't know any of these people around me. And here I've just threatened this guy who's got all these friends, and I'm like with this girl who I don't think the two of us can take the 8 of them. And so in that moment, I'm hanging, and I'm saying, what is about to happen? Now, thankfully, he backs down. He's like, hey, man, sorry, it's cool. I'll just bounce over here. And so everything just kind of waited until he said that. That's what his behavior let me know. And so it kind of worked out. But see, the truth of this proverb is usually true in the fact that somebody gets beat down when they run their mouth like that. And some of us know this experientially. And so when we see here that the lips of a fool walk into a fight and their mouth invites a beating, we need to hear that. We need to hear it carefully. Because whether it's a physical beatdown, or it's a financial beatdown, or a relational or an emotional beatdown, sometimes we bring these things on ourselves by beating Yosemite Sam, by shooting our mouth off. And if we can avoid those, we'll be much wiser and probably a much less injured person. So we need to think about that as we move through that tonight. 29:9 speaks of this, that a fool only rages and laughs in an argument. These are the kinds of people that when you have something substantive that you actually need to say to them, that they won't have it. Because they're either throwing an adult tantrum and pacing around like a lion in a cage, or they are somebody that just wants to laugh and giggle and never gets serious about it. That's the definition of a fool when it comes to having an argument. They're connected, I think. 10:23 and 13:19. They do wrong as if it were a joke, and turning away from evil is an abomination to them. We've been talking about this thought a couple weeks ago, about the fear of the Lord kind of being the true north for our compass. And what is being said here is these people, they're not looking to the fear of the Lord. In fact, they're not looking to God at all. They've got no respect for Him. They've got no awe or reverence for Him. And instead of evil being something that they would want to avoid, what's being said here is the avoidance of evil is what they want to avoid. So they're looking for every opportunity they can to participate in wickedness. That's what a fool does. And you see that here in 14:9, that they mock at the guilt offering. Under the old way that we would have related to God through the sacrificial system, there were offerings that were made when a relationship was broken. It's called the guilt offering. And what's being said here, most commentators agree this is a very difficult verse, but it has something to do with the concept of a wise person wants to repair broken relationships, but a foolish person, well, they don't have any patience for that either. If the relationship's broken, it doesn't matter to them. They're just going to move on and injure somebody else. That's the kind of thing a fool does. They leave a trail of dead bodies in their wake. 14:16 describes this even further, that they're reckless and careless. This is somebody who won't wear a seatbelt, even though that it saves lives. The seatbelt's just kind of a metaphor. These are people that they don't really give great thought to their words, to their deeds, to their finances, to their parenting. They just kind of run through life as if it's a train off the rails. They're reckless and careless. And then look at what happens here, that this extends even to their familial relationships in chapter 15, verses 5 and 20. They despise their father's instruction. They despise their own mother. And let me just say, I know I'm from the South and all, but man, if you despise your mom, that's bad stuff. These are people that have no respect for the God-ordained authorities in their lives of their parents. They just go about their life and say, it doesn't matter what my dad says. It doesn't matter what my mom says. I've got no patience for that. Because remember, I know the way my life should work. Final couple. 17:24. Their eyes are on the ends of the earth. Fool is someone who is easily distracted. One of the reasons why is they have what I like to call option-itis. These are these people that can never decide where they want to go to eat. And the reason why is because they don't want to miss what they might have at this restaurant, or they might want to miss what they have over here. They just want to keep their options open. These are people that can't keep a job. They can't keep a relationship. They won't stay in one place for more than 2 minutes. To be honest with you, I think a lot of church hopping that exists in North America is exactly this. It's this kind of foolishness. I saw this in college. There were folks that I knew that would go to church over here because they liked the music, but then they'd cut out because they didn't like the preacher, and then they'd scoot over here for the preacher, but then they'd go on mission trips with this church over here, and they just had all of this disconnected set of threads that they were trying to weave together to make a church experience for them. It was desperately unhealthy. They were so committed everywhere that they weren't committed anywhere. And that is foolishness. Because what God wants for us is to not have our eyes roaming to the ends of the earth, but to be focused, be committed in one place, and make a difference. Last one here, 21:20. A fool devours precious treasure and oil. It's probably better understood in its own historical context here that back then their wealth would have been considered oil and treasure that they could physically put their hands on. For us today, I think it's more of a principle of wise people gain and steward their wealth, but fools waste all that they have. Fools, somebody that devours everything that they've been given. When we think about that, we'll get into that more about some of the consequences here in just a moment. But this will apply, and we'll get into this later in the series, of how we deal with and how we manage our money. Because that determines a lot of times whether or not we're wise and whether or not we're foolish. Now, with all that said, let's kind of hit the pause button and ask a couple questions of ourselves here. The first one being, based on what we've seen, where are the fingerprints of foolishness in my life? And as you identify them, are you ready to listen and make the necessary adjustments to begin to deal with it? Next question. Are there people in your life that are speaking to you and helping you find these fingerprints? One of the things we talk about so many times here at Crossing is this concept of community. And the reason why is God has given us one another in part so that we might be able to see each other's blind spots. If you're here tonight and you say, man, I don't have any of these problems, let me just say, if I interviewed people that lived with you, worked with you, that really knew you inside and out, they'd be able to help us spot some of these fingerprints. And God loves us enough to give us one another to work on these things together. And as we work, we need to keep this final question in mind. Are we walking in a healthy balance of depending upon Jesus to change us, or are we simply trying hard on our own? Let me speak to this just a moment. We'll pick it up again at the end. One of the things that I think we're very prone to here in North America is what I like to call do-it-yourself Christianity. I think we've kind of taken the Lowe's or Home Depot, you can do it, we can help, and kind of brought that into our spirituality, that basically if we just do what these Proverbs says, then God's going to be real happy and real proud and our lives are going to be just fine. Well, the problem is that works for a while. But if it works, one of two things happens. Number one, we become self-righteous, just like I warned us about at the beginning. We say, look how wise I am. I should be leading a Bible study on wisdom because people can come and sit at my feet and I can teach them the ways that will make life work. And that can lead to pride, which goes before what? A fall. But if we recognize that way is wrong, but then we go for a little bit further, and then we see, you know what, I'm really not good at this. I'm really not much of a Christian. Then we stand at this crossroads of either despairing or depending upon Christ. And it's in that moment we need to say, hey, I understand God has told me what to do, but I also understand He's told me how to do it. And it's by letting Christ live and work His spiritual power through me into my life. See, that's the balance and the tension that we need here. We're actively doing, we're actively obeying, but we're also understanding that it is God that works in us to will and to work according to His good purpose. And so our response is to respond to Him in obedience. We need to hold those things in tension as we begin to deal with these. But if you're not motivated yet, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the next part yet, of seeing the consequences of being a fool. Some of these I won't spend as much time on because they're very similar to what we've already seen. But the first one comes to us right here from chapter 3, verse 35, that a fool will get disgrace. The concept here is whether you pay now or you pay later, you will pay in some way for your foolishness. There's always going to be some kind of repercussion to not following God's way. Thankfully, by the grace of God, we usually don't see as bad as it could have been, but we need to know that there is a cost for following the way of the fool. Sometimes that cost is this, 12:16, that the vexation of a fool is known at once. That word probably is better translated for us as anger, that in those Yosemite Sam moments, what is revealed? That that person in that moment is being a fool. They're not exercising self-control. They're not bridling their tongue. They're flipping out at their children, at their workers, at themselves. And so we need to see that that is a consequence, that we're outed, if you will, in our foolishness. 11:29, that a fool will be servant to the wise of heart. And I don't mean this in a harsh way, but I don't know if you've noticed what I've noticed as I've grown a little older, that typically those guys who sit in the back of the class in high school that kind of throw spitwads and make paper airplanes and make fun of the smart kids, those guys end up working for the smart kids when they get a little bit older. And what does that show us? It shows us the truth of this proverb, that the fool will be a servant to the wise of heart. Part of the reason is, in chapter 14, verse 7, is that they have no words of knowledge. That when push comes to shove and they need a sharp word to be able to speak for wisdom, they go to the well of wisdom, they put down their bucket and they pull up air. Because they've not applied themselves to wisdom. They got nothing to say that will help them. It's what a fool looks like in their consequence. Here's another one. 14:8, 24, then 16:22. Their folly is deceiving and it brings folly. So it's almost like a skier on a slope that once you kind of start down this direction, you can make a foolish decision after a foolish decision after a foolish decision, and it just breeds itself. So let me just kind of stop here for a moment and say this. If you've just found yourself in a place where very recently I made a foolish decision, if you can, stop making decisions. Because some of the pastoral message that I've had to help people clean up is because they started down this direction and they had some negative momentum. The snowball just kept rolling down the mountain. So sometimes the wisest thing we can do if we recognize we're on a path of foolishness is to just cease and desist, get some friends in, say, hey, I've made a huge mess of my life. Can you help me sort out the pieces and let's try to make something good out of what's just happened. Now watch this progression that takes place in the next coming verses. Chapter 1, verse 32. The complacency of fools destroys them. The picture here, I think, is almost like somebody that's standing on the deck of a ship that's going down. They've handed out life jackets. They've handed out, hey, here's the information to get you to the lifeboat. And it's like they're just kind of standing there taking it all in. They're just listening as everybody else is running for their lives, and they're just kind of watching the ship go down. And if we can talk tonight, some of us are in that place. There's been some doctor, there's been some counselor, there's been some Christian that loves us, that has spoken into our lives and said, listen, if you don't address the issues that are in your life, whether it's your health, it's your weight, it's your emotional instability, it's your financial instability, if you don't deal with these things, your complacency is going to take you down. We need to hear that. And I think the wisest thing we need to do is to be able to say yes. And tonight God is saying something to me. I need to listen, or the complacency of the fool that I have been, it's going to cost me. I know I've been on the wrong end of that, or I guess the right end of it, depending on how you want to look at it myself. And if I can encourage you this, if you've not put yourself in that situation tonight, be preemptive and proactive and don't head down that road. Make the decisions that God would have you to make, following the pattern of Christ and the power of Christ to avoid those situations. And for heaven's sake, don't let the complacency of the fool lead you into trouble. Here's another one from 10:8, then again in verse 14, that a babbling fool will come to ruin. Picture here, I think, is this. It's almost like an open fire hydrant. Spewing foolishness all over the street, soaks everything. That if someone continues to run their mouth and it starts with foolishness, then it's just going to spread foolishness everywhere. Look at these. We saw these already before. 19:29, it can lead to condemnation and beatings. 14:3, from their mouths comes a rod for their backs. The concept here is almost like the words make a stick that somebody else can use to whack them. And then look at this in 10:21. That fools can die for a lack of sense. Now, I warned you last week, or made you aware of, depending on how you want to look at it. Darwin Awards, the folks that their motto was honoring those who improved the species by accidentally removing themselves from it. And if you haven't checked this out, I think it'd probably be a little bit good application for you to take this further. If you want some graphic pictures, they're not really pictures, it's just words, but some strong images, if you will, to help you see this proverb in reality, this is a great little website to check out. Now, the story I'll tell you here in just a second, this guy actually made it, but it's dumb enough that it's worth sharing. It also illustrates kind of a proverb, not in the Bible, but that will help you in life, that alcohol and fireworks do not mix. Okay, remember that. Well, this guy, who shall remain nameless, he's somehow around 4th of July had a few, and somehow he's around his friends who are shooting fireworks, and also he's around a football helmet, which I'm not sure how that came into play, but this was his great idea. I'm going to take this mortar firework, one of those that you kind of have sitting on the ground that's like a tube that shoots up, and he said, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put on this helmet, and I'm going to put the mortar firework on my head, all right? And I don't know how many bottles you have to come to this being a good idea, but apparently he had that many. And so he had loaded up, no pun intended, and then loaded up, there's somebody else lit, but he decides that now we're going to 3, 2, 1 blast off, and the rocket goes up, but when the dust clears, and he makes it through this, by the way, they find his bloody body, his head's kind of cracked open, and the helmet is just completely disintegrated. Number one, try that at home. Number two, what does that show us? That fools can die for a lack of sense. Now, I can tell by looking at you guys tonight, I don't have any rockets to the forehead tonight here. But I do have some folks that are made out of the same stuff. It's just like me. That we need to hear, and we need to see, and we need to understand that fools die for the lack of sense. And some of us here are experiencing some emotional death that is because of our foolishness. Some of us are experiencing some financial death that is because of our foolishness. Some of us are in trouble and are headed toward death because of our foolishness. I think God is saying to us through these proverbs, turn back. Don't be another story that will end up literally or figuratively in the Darwin Awards. That this kind of foolishness, it doesn't just affect us. I know we want to think that we live in a vacuum, but we don't. And listen to these next proverbs that really illustrate this for us. 13:20. The companions of fools will suffer harm. If you're here and you're an employer, you know this. Verse 10, 26:10. Hiring a fool is like an archer that wounds everyone. The picture here is literally, if you hire a fool to work for you, it's like handing them a bow, an arrow, and a quiver, and just letting them shoot at the business finances. Let them shoot at all the employees that work there. That there are repercussions for hiring fools. They take people out. And look what it does here to families. 17:21, 19:13. Their fathers have no joy. They're a ruin to them. They bring sorrow to their mother in 10:1. A grief to his father and bitterness to the one who bore him. 17:25. And just think about that. Some of us have caused some pain to our parents that maybe even God will have us go back and try to repair. Many of us, we will be in that situation someday. And part of what I'm going to blog about this week is how to try to help your kids from putting your whole family in this situation. Because in many ways, some of this can be headed off the past. And we need to understand that our foolishness is not just for us, but it affects other people. And we need to hear that. So now that we've defined what it is, we see it in action, we've seen its serious consequences, let's turn the corner and talk about how we can avoid this kind of behavior. I think the first thing is the most obvious. That you want to recognize where the fingerprints of foolishness already are in your life. To just take a look. Look at this list. Look over it again in community group and say, here's where I've already been guilty. And say, here's some things that I can avoid. And I think when that begins to happen, this is where the gospel really comes into play. That we begin to confess those things, and we begin to repent of those things. We recognize that Jesus died for those. They are not the truest thing about us, no matter how foolish we've been. They do not define us, and we don't need to listen to that lie. But as we repent, we need to move away from them. We need to put distance between us and them. I was reading this week, there's a Puritan, I think his name is John Owen, that says this, that you will either be killing sin, or sin will be killing you. And so the concept here is, as we turn from this foolishness, we're literally turning away from these things that can kill us. And we're walking in repentance in the right direction. If you need some additional motivation to do this, just go back and take a look at this list of the consequences of being a fool. Here's the other thing I want to stress. In all this talk about how difficult this is, how bad this is, we can't lose sight of this good news. That we need to realize that God is reaching out to us no matter where we are, and we need to respond. If you feel the weight of this tonight, hear these words. Proverbs 1:22 and following. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Just a few pages later, chapter 9. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, this is the embodiment of wisdom, figuratively speaking, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight. You see this again in the New Testament. James chapter 1, verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. And so what we need to understand here is, if we feel like we're under the weight, we need to see that that puts us in a place to best experience the weight of the cross. And it's a good weight on that side. Of understanding how horrible and wicked our foolishness is, puts us in a place to see the beauty of the wisdom of God that's been revealed to us through Christ. So the more you feel the depth of your sin, the more you can see and be thankful for the beauty of what Jesus has done. That's why the next step is this, that we need to follow the pattern of wisdom in the power of Jesus. And when we look at this and we say, hey, he's telling me I need to stay away from this. He's telling me I need to do what I was supposed to do last week. That we walk in that tension of it's the pattern of Christ in the power of Christ. One maxim that's been so helpful to me as I think through this in my own life is that God just didn't give us these principles, but He gave us a person. He gave us the principles, but He gave us a relationship with the person to strengthen us and help us fulfill it. Number 4, we need to walk with the wise so that we might grow wise. 13:20. I know that a lot of us are in situations where we can't avoid the company of fools. We live next to people we live next to. We can't get away. Those people that are in our family that epitomize all of these things, we can't get away. We work with people that show us this on a daily basis. But in those areas when we can choose, we need to choose to hang out with wise people and not foolish people. You know, one of the things that I saw early in our marriage that really helped us was when all of my friends that were my age were going skiing and they were buying cars they couldn't afford, and they were buying houses that they couldn't afford. Lori Ann and I, by the grace of God, were able to hang out with some people that didn't have much money. And by being around those people that were growing in wisdom, even though they weren't yet growing in finances, it saved us from so much trouble that these people are still trying to dig out of. So if you're able to surround yourself with wise counselors, and there's plenty in this church, in your community group, and other folks in this place, surround yourself with those people that can help you grow in wisdom. And finally, ask this question. What is the wise choice in this situation? If you don't remember anything else tonight, you need something to take with you, that's a question that can help you. Based on what I've heard, based on what I've known, based on what the Spirit is saying within me, in this situation, whether it's my parenting, or my schooling, or my job, what is the wise choice in this situation? And that's a question that will serve you well. So where does all this leave us tonight? I think it leaves us in one place. That we've got a choice to make. Are we going to despair? Or are we going to depend? Are we going to say, hey, I am a fool, there is no hope to me, or hope for me, or are we going to be in a place where we can say, you know what, I need to depend upon what Jesus has done. He's given me the pattern to follow, and I recognize that I can't fulfill it, but He's fulfilled it perfectly. And I want to depend upon His work within me to help me grow in that direction. See, that's why we take communion every week, no matter what we're talking about, because we always come to the same place. If we want to do what God says, we're either going to despair or we're going to depend. And tonight, if you're here, maybe you've been on a spiritual journey and you kind of ask a lot of questions. Maybe you don't have them all answered. And you'd say, you know what, there's something going on inside of who I am that is saying to me, I need to really listen to what He said. That God is saying to me that I'm a fool. Well, the answer for you is to look to Christ. Allow that despair to drive you to depend upon Him. In just a minute, don't take communion. Instead, come and bring the person who brought you. There'll be some men and some women in the back that would love to answer any questions you have without any judgment. And just begin to talk to you about how you can move from that place of depending and into depending upon Christ. And for all of us, no matter where we are, no matter how we intersect with what we see, the answer is the same for us. It's to look to Christ, the ultimate embodiment of wisdom. To move from our despair into a place of dependence upon Him. To put our hearts in the right place to get ready to take communion. Stand with me if you could. Let's read this.